Peace, peace, peace. Greetings, everyone. It's Chief Yuya here. Willfully, you can hear me. If you can hear me, please just throw a one up in the chat for me, if you don't mind. Um, yeah, so I'll just keep talking, and then hopefully one. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So peace to everyone, of course, and welcome to Movie Innerstandings with Brother Lowe, but with Brother Yuya in this session. So we're going to be breaking down 2001: A Space Odyssey, and willfully, some of you had an opportunity to watch it. We put the advertisements up for it ahead of time because of the fact that it's such a rich movie, and it's one of those type of films that maybe you might want to watch more than once. You might miss something or whatever. So we wanted to make sure that we gave everyone plenty of time to soak it up at the levels that they desired to soak it up at. All right. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to do just a little interpretation, of kind of how I see it. Peace, Master Menelec. Peace, 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 Sister Precious, Sister Deidre. And I'm going to do little interpretation, peace, Sister Arlene, of how I see it. But one of the things that's so beautiful about this film and why I picked it is because, peace, Sister Aquia, I really appreciated how the director and writer, Stanley Kubrick, how he spoke about it, when he was asked about its meaning, its meaning, one of the things that he said was that, there is the cursory layer, or there's the elementary layer, that you can break down and understand, and then it goes deeper, you know. And I always appreciate art like that. And 2001 is really, it's a work of art. It's really a artistic piece, and there are so many different layers that any interpretation that you give for it is not necessarily going to be complete. You're talking about a movie where in the first 20 minutes of the film there's no dialogue. So that alone, it forces you to kind of use different faculties to understand the message that's being conveyed by the writer. So I've jotted down a couple of notes, and what we're going to do. So I'm just going to give you a kind of syllabus. You're going to be seeing me all month. All right. So Brother Lowe will be back, but I'm going to break this movie down in about 4 or 5 parts. The movie really has about 3 to 4 parts. Really, there's like really three major parts of the film, which also make it interesting because it goes through these changes where you think this is about one thing, and then let me turn my stuff off, and then it goes into another thing, and then it goes into another thing, But they're all interconnected, and that's part of the theme of the movie. It's the cycle. It's pretty much the cycle of life, but the movie is more focused on the value and the properties of death. Okay, so you're going to see multiple deaths inside of the film, which causes it to have these different, like, chambers it goes through, which makes it real cool. But yeah, so I'm gonna break it down, and then, you know I invite you to leave your questions. You can put them in the live chat, but if you leave them under the comment section, it's even better. So that way, if you have a question, or not even a question, a comment, because this isn't really a teaching, because it's somebody else's art. I can't really teach you somebody else's art. you know. So this is really just us exploring, with Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. We're able to put together, in terms of their thinking. So yeah, let me give you, now that we know what we're going to be looking at, and they're not going to be long sessions. We're gonna break it up in, like I said, about 4 or 5 sessions, and we'll get a lot out of it. Yeah, because it's a worthwhile film. Okay. Peace, Sovereign Eats. Peace, Naya. Peace, on New Radio. Peace, YG Gutter. All right. So, so here we go. So, the movie starts in total blackness. There's a cool thing about that. Obviously, the audio that's in the film is so key to everything that's happening. And if you read the book, the movie actually is based off of several works, or really two works. There was a short story called The Sentinel, and there's a book, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then of course there's the movie, which came out in 1968, right? But the thing is, how most of the time when we watch a movie, it's like, okay, there's a book, and the book was put together so well that they were able to get a movie deal. That's not how this went. The way this went was that the movie was being done, and while the movie was being done, which was based off of a short story by Arthur C. Clarke called The Sentinel, and while the movie was being done, the Stanley Kubrick told Arthur C. Clarke, "Go write the book." Right? So it's kind of like they were happening almost at the same time. But what's kind of cool about Peace Brothers Act, the way they did it, was that Arthur C. Clarke purposely withheld a lot of pages. They kind of did it to each other, withheld information from the movie and from the book from each other. So they did that so that they would almost kind of be their own entities. So that if somebody came and read the book, they wouldn't feel like, well, I don't have to go watch the movie. I already read the book, and vice versa. All right. So, um, though they're loosely based off of each other, they all really converge on this short story called The Sentinel, right? And of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey is supposed to be about what happens in 2001. And one. I know it's kind of funny, but we have movies like that all the time. 2030, 2044, where it's going to be apocalyptic, and people are roaming around looking for clean water and stuff like that. So we have movies like that too. You know, but for this one, it was 2001, right? And again, keep in mind it came out in 1968, and there's a lot of key elements to, like, even the timing. When you're looking at a movie, you don't necessarily just, understanding that everything is a ritual, right? So from who directs the movie, who writes the movie, who produces the movie, what studio puts the movie out, and very importantly, just like when you study in scripture, what's going on in the world at the time that this film is being released, because art often does imitate life, or in the case of film, oftentimes art drives life. There are certain things that are put out to kind of sometimes desensitize people towards other things that maybe higher powers would like to do. So they'll introduce them first in the movie, get your nervous system used to it, then okay, boom, here you go. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the governor, killing everybody, right? So they do things like that. All right. So um, what we don't find out in the movie, I'm just going to share a little bit of the book, not much, because I want it to be fair to those who didn't read the book, because this is a movie decode, and I don't want to throw a lot of elements in there and be like, I don't remember that part, right? But I'll just give you a little tiny bit. So in the beginning, there was this group of people, or this group of entities called the firstborn. Okay. And the job of the firstborn, or the role of the firstborn was to watch over the universe. Okay. And in watching over the universe, they were supposed to make sure that certain species evolved at the level that they were supposed to, right? So I want to give you that, their job, and this is from Arthur C. Clarke's book, and their job was to make sure that they eliminated any sort of genetic or planetary threats, even if the threats were those people themselves, like anything that would keep them from evolving or keep them from going forward. Their job was to eliminate it, right? And this was a group of entities called the firstborn. Okay, so I'm going to give you that part. Now, in order for the firstborn to do what they did, what they established is what you find in the movie later. And I know where I'm going for a little forward, but I'm gonna go back. The monoliths. They established these monoliths throughout this universe, right? And these monoliths are, as you see, they look like They look like iPhones, right? But they're just tall, black, stoic, non-moving rectangular objects, right? And in the book, they're referred to as the monoliths, right? And you have one that's placed in Africa, right? And I want to be clear where yes, the movie it doesn't start in Africa. It starts with scenes of the planet, right? After we come out of darkness, it's total darkness, and you have this sonic soundscape, which was just done brilliantly. The way they did the audio, because well, I don't want to start getting into music stuff, but um, the whole concept of the audio in the beginning with the blackness, because some of you might have watched it, and I'm curious. You can tell me in the chat who watched it and thought something was wrong. Like it was all black and it was like, wait a minute, and like was, skipping ahead, like, is this not a real copy or however you saw it? Who thought it wasn't, there was something wrong with it? I'm just curious in the chat who will own up to it. Deidre. Okay, Menelec. Yeah. Hmm. Right. I knew somebody was gonna get got. you know Obviously, like I said, it's a art, it's a work of art. I had the bootleg, yeah, so you must have went to 1 2 3 movies and um so yeah, in the beginning the whole concept is, and Sister Arlene too, was I'm alone in the universe. See, that's the science of where we begin. There's so much symbolism in this film, like, and I mean, you don't really, I'm not a visual artist, but I can see stuff, right? I may not be able to recreate it, but um one of the things that you'll notice in this film is the use of symmetry. Symmetry is all over the film. You could watch this film with the sound off from beginning to end and still like be blown away with the placements of lines and the placements of colors and things like that. It's very deep. But anyway, so like I said, you had these monoliths, um, and these monoliths had the ability to advance civilization. You see, and they were placed in different places. One was placed orbiting Jupiter. One was placed on the moon, right? And another one was placed in prehistoric Africa. And another one was placed actually in the fifth dimension, but built within a third dimensional space. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. So like, just picture like something solid being built in the sky, right? Just, if that doesn't make sense to you, but it was built in the fifth dimension, but built inside of a third dimensional space. So you had actually four monoliths that were created or that were planted and left by the firstborn. Okay, and in the movie we find out about the one on Jupiter. We see the discovery of the one on the moon, and of course, in the beginning, we have the monolith that exists in Africa. Now, again, this is a work of art, and I say that to say that prehistoric Africa wouldn't have looked like that. Prehistoric Africa would have looked more like the Jungle Book. It would have been lush vegetation, tropical jungle kind of area. But for the purpose of what they were, or what Kubrick was seeking to convey in terms of idea, they made it almost like a deserted desert wasteland where you had these 8 men and women, who were there, barely surviving, barely holding on. Again, which was genius, just in terms of like the landscape. So when we first finally, after we see the different images of the earth, and they're all still images. One of the things that you notice, and the light angles are very, very important to pay attention to in this film, because the light angles don't make any sense. And I know Kubrick did that on purpose, right? So when you see the image of the earth based on the angulation of the sun, the light should have been somewhere else, but we're going to get into why that was. But I want you, anybody who's remembering what I'm saying and taking notes, just remember I said that. Okay, so then after we go through our different scenes, we now come to like we're on the African plains. We come to these 8 people, and these 8 people are basically just eating vegetation, and they have these top, I think that's how you pronounce it, um, animals that are next to them, and everyone's kind of living together, and they're surrounding this very small, I would say, scantily looking water hole. I'm reading Zach's comment. He's drinking water, y'all. So I mixed y'all with hole, water, y'all. So they're surrounding this water hole, right? And it wasn't much water there, um, considering the size of the space, but this was where they congregated, right? And what's deep about it is that they're living again with other animals and everybody's living in peace. And what you see surrounding them are bones, bones of other animals and whatnot who have died. Now, there's an understanding of death then, where death was something that was inevitable and was an everyday reality. So unlike us, we take our bones and we bury them. When somebody dies, we don't want to see them anymore. We don't want to be reminded that not only did this person die, but death is an inevitability. So what we do is we take the body, we burn it up, we turn it into ashes, we put it in a little pot somewhere, stuff it away, or we take the body, we put it underneath the ground, right? So now we don't have to be reminded of the pain of loss. Whereas in this reality, in this state of being that man is in, they're surrounded by bones of different animals and everything like that. And their everyday reality of constantly needing to find food because there's like no vegetation, they're just eating little plants and things like that. That's an everyday reality for them, right? So that's critical because again, you're looking at cycles of death. And if we look at that right now, we're seeing um, where there's a constant desire, the constant need to eat, right? Which is no different. You'll see that later on in the film. There's eating that always happens at the end. And that can be symbolic of man's constant desire to consume, this constant feeling of their mortality being right around the corner, always trying to find something. I have this little water hole here and I'm just drinking and I'm eating, I'm drinking, I'm eating. Now again, you have to look at the time that this movie came out, 1968. We're still looking at the USSR, we're looking at Russia, and there's still this Cold War that's happening, which we'll get into later because that comes up again. That comes up the Russia piece, right? So in this moment here, they're at their watering hole, they have animals around them, and they're in a situation where they're vulnerable to the elements. There's no shelters that are built necessarily. They have a little what seems like a cave. But as leopards come, when a leopard wants something to eat, the leopard just drops down into where they're at, grabs one of them, eats them, and keeps it pushing. So they are the preyed upon, right? Then further on, we see another group of 8 men. Now, the leader of the first tribe, and you only get this in the book, the leader of the first tribe that we first come into contact with, his name is Moon Watcher. So you're going to hear me say Moon Watcher again later, right? But there's a leader of another tribe who comes, or I don't know, they're not even a tribe, they're just a group. And that's important. They're a group, okay? Another group of 8 men. They come along, they want the water. So what they do is they come up to this particular group and they start making noise. Eight noises, 8 man noises. And essentially they scare off this group, this family and this group away from the water hole, which was obviously their means of survival. Now, what's so critical about this scene, what's so important is that there was no fighting. It was just the flailing of hands and arms and threatening noises and things like that that chased this group away. Now, why is that is so important in this sense? Because what we're looking at here is a time when um, it's really the garden of or the Ga of Eden, or the Garden of Eden. Man is living in peace, so you don't have this concept of, in order for me to have what you have, I have to hurt you. I have to physically impose myself upon you. I have to kill you. So that concept has not been established yet, at least among men. Now we have the leopards who are attacking and whatnot, but among the ape man, right? They're just like, you scare me away, you scare me away. Now I die because I can't drink water. End of story. But there's no concept here of I'm fighting for what I believe I own, because there's no sense of ownership that's been established as of yet. Okay, so they get chased off. They get chased off from their water hole. Now the new tribe is there. They have their water, and one of the things that you'll see is that they're coming with aggression and more so threats, right? Because even right before the camera angle closes, one of the other ones, they look into the camera and they like, "Urgh," so they're even telling us as the watchers, get out of here. Anybody could get it, even you watching the movie. Okay, so now we see the next scene. We see our group that was chased away from their water hole. We see them in like a cave structure. It's nighttime, and there's something that's happened in this. We can interpret the cave as being the womb. Okay, so once they were put in a situation where they were no longer safe or no longer to enjoy the luxuries of the garden, which was the water, they were chased out of the garden. They went back into the womb where it was semi-safe, of course, right? We see in that moment, in that scene, we see one of the female eight women. She removes, like, she brings her breast to a child to feed her child. Everyone's just kind of hunched up next to each other, kind of irritated. They growling at each other. Now we're back in this cave. We're hunched up, and you see Moonwatcher just kind of, looking, and you could tell like he's thinking about something. So now what happens is, because of what just occurred, and because the situation that they were put into, there's a spark and a stimulus of thought. Now thinking or cognition comes into, what the heck am I gonna do? Nothing really I can do. They chased me away from the water hole. I'm the leader of this crew here. We're pretty much going to die here. We don't have water. We don't have any way to protect ourselves. The leopard just comes whenever they want to eat. They just come take us, whatever, 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 right? Um, so what happens is, we then see, fast forward a little bit, there's an appearance of a monolith, one of the black monoliths at the entrance of the cave, right? So now, in understanding what this represents, the monolith at the entrance of the cave can represent the creative force. It's a big black dingus now. It's a big black monolith, and it's at the entrance of the womb, or the entrance of the cave. So that within itself would represent the creative force. I had a couple of notes I jotted down. Yeah, that would represent, that creative force, or even again, kind of the concept of looking at the earth in void and in darkness, and that creative principle, looking over and then making a decision of, what am I going to do here, or how am I going to improve upon what is here, right? So yeah, a couple of notes I had. So, like, you're right. This is a piece that I knew I left out. That's why I jotted down some notes. So when we see the barren, I'm gonna back up a little bit. When we see the barren plain, one of the things that we see from in the deserts and the rocks is that the sun is rising in the east. Okay, so the sun begins to rise in the east over the horizon, and that represents, whenever you see that, and again, you can interpret it however you want, but typically when you see that, it's representing the birth of a world, or like a new world is happening. Something new is happening, or just literally a new planet is being birthed, right? So we see that sun rising in the east, and throughout this whole scene, every significant thing that happens is kind of tracked by the movement of the sun, right? So the sun rises in the east, the world is birthed, and as the sun begins to sweep across the heavens, this is in our beginning scenes, it's sweeping across the heavens. The first thing you'll notice is that there's wind. Okay, so wind now comes, you see wind across the plain. Now whenever you see wind, and again, to interpret it however you want, that means that something is getting ready to change. Something is happening. When is that spiritual agitation, is that spiritual movement. So we see wind in this opening shot, meaning okay, something's getting ready. That's our clue that something's getting ready to happen. It's almost like when you look at old Western movies and you see the tumbleweed going across the town and the wind sweeps across, and then you see the strangers arrive into town on their horses, meaning, you know, something's about to happen, right? So as the sun gets to its highest point, what we then see is shrubbery. We see a little bit of greenery. Um, so now, what this means when we see the traveling of the sun across the sky, of course, we would normally say, well, that's a day, right? No, just like in Hebrew, day, you have yom. Yom does not just mean day, as in 24 hours. Yom also means year. Yom also means an age. So when we see the sun traveling like that in this opening shot, and I know you might say, well, like, it was just the sun. It was just the wind. But you have to understand is that in the opening 20 minutes of this film, there's no dialogue. So everything that's placed is placed there for a reason, because how else would you interpret what's happening if not by the lights and the movements and what's happening in nature? Because there's a couple of things that happen. I'll show you. So like I said, after we see that movement, we see that this is an age. So the age of this particular group of men, or 8 men, quote unquote, um, having their water taken, not having any protection, being eaten up by the leopards, don't have much food, no burial rights, so forth and so on. That's an age of man, if you will. That's what it's supposed to represent. And I can tell you, it represents the innocence of man. Okay, this is the age of innocence. How do we know that this is the age of innocence? Because you see no violence among men, or 8 men. Of course, we're looking at 8 men, but there's no violence. Okay, so when they want to come take their water, they "Ooh, booga 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 booga," and they run away. When a leopard wants to kill them, you know, they just they're scared, or they run. Even when the monolith comes, you notice that, oh, here we go with the could one of you moderators get the I'm not really interested in a sexy date, or yeah, anything like that. I'm not really feeling that romantic. So the thing is, so what we see is that there's that scaring or that frightening kind of thing, but there's really nothing that happens. So we see this is supposed to represent the primitive forms of man. And even when we see the taup there, which is the animal that with the long nose, kind of look like a pig with a long nose, um, they're together, right? Like they're both digging in the dirt looking for little pieces of vegetation to eat or whatever. So what you're seeing is a time when there's harmony between animal and man. There's peace between animal and man. No one's trying to hurt each other, and they're both living in a state of innocence. If I get attacked, I get attacked. But either way, we can sit here. We could both try to find some leaves to eat together. Um, and in that time, you see man pretty much eating just roots and eating plants. No one's injured, no one's hurt. But like I said, that waving of the arms and the grunting was about as real as it got between men. It was kind of like in Shaga Zulu when he introduced, well, we gotta have to kill to live, you know. Yeah, we could show that. Yeah, we're gonna have to kill to live, you know. It changed the game up, right? So again, this is supposed to be, I would say it's supposed to be a symbolic emulation of what happened in the Garden of Eden, where there was innocence at that time. And what happens is, as the sun is going, if you look at the shots, as the sun is going across the sky, it's going from east to west, right? As it's going towards the west, we begin to see different aspects of life emerge. Even in terms of they're getting their water taken. When they go back into the cave or back into the womb, the sun has completely set in the west, right? So that's symbolic of a travel from east to west, or from enlightenment going back into darkness, or going back into not knowing, being in the garden, which was the water hole, and then being chased back into the wilds of the dark, where now everybody is, like I said, there's less space, they're irritable, so forth and so on. That's the movement of the sun from the east to west. Or you could even look at it as going from eastern to western culture, but definitely going from innocence now, and living in harmony, and kind of being symbolized as being as sinking further into the west in that state. um After that confrontation, but again, during that confrontation, no one was killed. Okay. Um so right, so they go, I'm just looking at some of my notes. Okay, so right, so we go back into the cave, and now at that moment where Moonwatcher goes into the cave, that's his first step of change. That's his first step of evolution, right? Because he's now thinking. We see two things happen that we didn't see happen when they were outside. We see the mother feeding the child milk from her breast, and we now see Moonwatcher. Here we go. They love to cheap F. Then we're in. Okay. Cheap F. Well, I mean, your moderators, I guess y'all got to clean that up, but a cheap F. You're in a recession, and it's, crypto is down. But so yeah, so we have this concept of now humanity is coming forth, and humanity is coming forth as a response to what happened in necessity, right? So um then towards dawn, if you notice, if you listen to the soundtrack, we start to hear the sound like a buzz, right? Now, of course, I have the soundtrack 2000, because it's the music is the soundscapes were so awesome. But that is actually that sound is bees. It's the buzzing of bees that you're hearing. Peace after Gertrude. That sound that you're hearing is the buzzing of bees. Okay. Now, why do we hear the buzzing of bees when the monolith appears? Because bees represent society, and they represent industrialism. Now, not industrialism like, okay, now we're gonna have flying cars and tramways and stuff like that. Tramways, and buildings and skyscrapers scrapers. They represent cohesion. So whenever you see that the bees come forth, whether you're in the buzzing or you see a bee or whatever, it's representing now that as a society, we're working as a group. We're working together. Okay, so when the monolith comes, you hear that bzzz, but of course there's so much other stuff happening, like they're frightened, they're jumping around and everything, that you might not notice that that's actually the sound of of bees, which that's supposed to represent. Now we're gonna get ready to learn something as a group and do something as a group. Um, so, and also in that moment that you see the monolith, the sun is also rising. One of the things that you may notice is that throughout the film, there's an artificial light that's in the background. Now, we don't know if that artificial light is a second sun, or if that artificial light is an alien ship, or if it's the watchers looking on. But I think it's something else, which I'm going to get into later, right? Which kind of makes sense. If I know what it is, we'll get into that. So at that moment, there is a um at that moment the sun begins to rise. We got the monolith, um and it's just this obelisk that's kind of sitting in front of the cave, with this buzzing sound of bees that's in front of it. Okay. And I want to make something very clear and important in this moment, right? So there are theories that the eight people, or the monolith, or the obelisk, the black obelisk that came, was really like God, right? That really doesn't make any sense, because we already saw creation. The planet already existed. and it was already vegetation, it was already water. In fact, one of the important things that you'll notice is that when they show the aerial shots of the planets, there's two things you should pay attention to that were very significant. One, the Earth is not spinning, the Earth is not rotating. Look at the early shots right before we got to the ape man, and they show it. There's no rotation of the planet. Number one. Number two, there's no continents. All you see is clouds and water. And you may not even notice it because it's all planet Earth, you just ignore it. But there's no images of any continents, and there's no movement of the actual planet. Okay. So, but nonetheless, creation had already occurred, right? Now, why is this kind of significant? That why do I bring this up? Let us make man in our image, right? Some of us are familiar with that line from Genesis. Let us make man in our image, right? Now, the significance with that, and I could read it out, so I'm saying it, you know, Genesis 1 and 26. Because I want to repeat it in a certain way. And Elohim, him, im is what? Plural. Plural what? Elo, or Elah. Elohim. Elohim means the deities. Elohim said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So Elohim created man in its own image. In the image of Elohim created he him. Male and female, he created he them. Right. Now, why is that? Why am I bringing that up? Let us make man in our image. Right. It didn't start by saying, let us create man in our image. Let us make man. After man was made, then he said, let us create. So Elohim created man in his own image. Now you might say create, make, same words. They're not the same words, right? So this possibly implies that man already existed. So when Elohim said, let us make man in our image, it's saying there's this entity here. Let's say, for instance, an ape man. Let's take this ape man and civilize this ape man. How would we civilize it? Well, we would make the man in our own image after our own likeness. So that way now, this substance, this individual, these people, really, because they were people who were there, can now have dominion over the fish and over the fowl and so forth and so on. After we make them in our image, because we are authoritarians, we are the authority. So if we make them in our image and our likeness, then they can rule like how we rule. Okay. So the concept that and again, I'm spitting theories. Like you might say, nah, God created. All right, fine. You can have that. Not trying to take it away from you. It's just different ways to look at it. But clearly, when you ask other questions like, well, who was it that would have harmed Cain? Who was he so afraid of? You have to at some point admit that, oh, there were other people here already. And when he said that he placed man in the Garden of Eden, placed man, that means that he was somewhere else. And then he put him over there in the Garden of Eden, right? So again, it supports the idea that when we look at this movie, the obelisk, they're in the womb, they're chased back into a state where they're now pondering their survival in this womb. Man, we just lost our water hole, so forth and so on. The obelisk, or the creative force, this black creative force, this phallus type symbol appears in front of the womb or in front of the cave. And now when you read the book, you learn that it actually started to evolve and teach them different things, right? Which we'll get into we'll get into in a second. One of the things that you'll notice is that when the obelisk was there, was that they were afraid, so they're making all this and going crazy and getting close to it and wanting to touch it and whatnot. And there's some that's like cheering in the back, like, "Ah," and there's some kind of closer. That's the interplay between Adoma and Hawa, or some of you may know as Adam and Eve. Um, Adam is the encouraged and Eve is the encourager. Okay, so that's the metaphorical symbolism that we have in that story, where she's like, I ate the fruit. The fruit is good. Have some. It's lovely. So in that instance where you have those who are in the back, like, yeah, do it. Let's move towards this. They're acting as like a motivator or a stimulator towards your evolution. Those would be your encouragers or your hawas, which should always be the case in a relationship. Always. Now, of course, many of us are subject to the devil's society. So in the devil's society, it's the exact opposite. So what is it in the devil's society? The man is always trying to do something, and the woman is always telling him he can't do it, right? Because when you are when you have fallen victim to satanic mindset, then the satanic mindset takes everything that's divine and flips it upside down, right? It takes, wow, they back with the tender, we have sex cheaper. Because before it just said cheap F. Now it's saying sex cheaper. So it's cheaper than what it was before. All right. Okay. You can keep tempting me. You talk about being in the garden, being tempted. Mm-hmm. Send me to Addie. So anyway, so that's the concept that we have here, right? We have they're in the face of this stone, this unmoving stone. And finally, one of the eight men, which is really Moonwatcher, they reach out, right? Now, of course, that reach out is supposed to be symbolic of that famous painting of you know, I think it's on the roof, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, where Adoma is reaching out to God. You see the fingers are touching, like that. So you see that again later in the film, that reaching out. We won't get into that. Now, at this point, the volume of the music changes to like almost a feverish sort of pitch, right? So that volume lets us know something significant just happened, right? Um, and now the other eight men gather around and they're all touching the obelisk. They're all touching, right? Very significant. Um, and you have to consider that they were not just touching the obelisk, but they were looking into it. Very similar to the prophet Nostradamus. What he used to do was stare into an onyx plate. He had an onyx plate, and it was all black onyx, and he would just stare into it, and that's how he would see his different prophecies that he would share. Um, I've said that for years. There's a reason that we don't have glass front televisions anymore. You turn the television off, you stare into it, and you have a scrying tool. It's like a big black scrying crystal, you know. And I mean, some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. It's because of the age that you're at. But if you could just imagine your iPad, the glass when it's off and just staring into the darkness of the glass. The difference is that old school televisions were bowled out as well. So they refracted light in a different kind of way. And if you stared into them long enough, you would see images inside of there, um, especially after you would turn the TV off and you would think it's still the bulb, still hot, still showing old images, and you just keep staring. Yeah, that wasn't what I was watching. Because it was communication happening through there. But anyway, so that takes us down um, a place in the mystery schools, right? So in this instance, the obelisk is kind of pushing forward man's evolution, similar to what the seraphim or what I won't say Inky, I'll just say the serpent did in the God of Eden when the serpent spoke to the encourager, to encourage the encouraged. And in that there was a evolving, there was a gift, if you will, of intellect that was given to Adoma and Kawa, for them to begin their journey, where they would no longer be trapped in a history that was defined for them, but now they can make certain things happen for themselves, right? So the obelisk or the monolith is a teaching device, right? Very similar to, again, the agent Satan being a teaching device for Lucifer. Okay. Um, Not the same entities as people think. They're different sides. One is the agent that actually carries out the manifestation of certain things, and the other one holds the light of the information for it to be carried out. Right. Um, so now what happens? Right. This is a scene. Just looking at some of my notes. Um, there's a scene that gets ready that happens that I think is probably really memorable. I think anybody who's ever watched the film is probably like one of the most memorable ones. So what we have is we have Moonwatcher. He now, because he's being taught by the obelisk. Now we don't have that in the actual film, but in the book, the obelisk is like teaching him how to throw, like teaching him how to pick up rocks and throw them different places and stuff like that. So he's teaching him now how to kind of use his digits and how to kind of employ some level of dexterity, right? So we have these galactic watchers, if you will, and they see that these apes in this moment, or these ape people, have the potential to evolve. Now, there's a theory. There's a couple of things, right? The monoliths. This is my theory, right? And there's a bunch of theories about the monoliths. Some of you might remember a couple of years ago. I'm gonna say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, monoliths were appearing around the planet. And I don't think they were from the Galactic Watchers or anything. I think people just were, just playing or whatever. But they were chrome monoliths. They weren't black. I knew there was one in Oklahoma. There was one in Mexico. There's a couple other ones. But I mean, I'm thinking it was a heck. You know what? I don't know. I'm thinking it was a hoax. But what else? What else would media tell me? Other than, oh, no, go back to sleep. It's fine. It's fine. Nothing to see here. So I don't know. But nonetheless, my theorem has always been that the monoliths appear when man reaches a certain zenith, just like how the sun reached a certain zenith. When the man reaches a certain zenith, when they're ready to evolve, because we'll get into the next uncovering of the next monolith in our next session. But this monolith was the only monolith that we saw that was in plain sight. It almost even followed them, like they went back into the cave, and then it's in the entrance of the cave, right? They didn't have to dig it up. They didn't have to go in underwater to get it. It was right there, very accessible, because that's what they had the potential to do at that time. It's right here. We can get it. We don't know how to farm. We don't know how to do anything. We don't know how to dig. We just eating roots and plant. That's it. We don't even know how to grow this stuff. We just find it where we can find it. So, um, when man is in a place where man is either about to destroy itself or needs to evolve further, then these monoliths appear to teach them how to go to the next stage of evolution. Now, I want to get into this next scene, which I think was kind of a big scene, in my opinion. I think it was in a lot of people's, because it was so graphic, right? So at one point we see Moonwatcher. He gets a bone, right? He gets the a bone of a taup, which was again an animal that looked like a pig with a long nose, and he starts like playing with it, right? And he starts smashing other bones of this animal with this larger bone, right? Now, in that scene, you see he starts to get more and more violent. Like you see a rage building up in him while he's smashing these bones, right? And in that, what I would say symbolically, he's showing is a level of conquering over death. Those animal bones sitting out there are like, they're symbolic of, this is the death that's waiting for you any moment, because you have no way to protect yourself. You have no shelter. There's no water. There's no food. You're gonna die. Like every day, probably somebody in your crew is gonna die, right? So when he takes his bone and he's smashing this animal, there's a level of, there's a triumph over this inevitability of death, because what you see him do at one point is he smashes the head, which was the skull of this dead animal, right? Now smashing the skull of the dead animal was kind of it was speaking to dominance, because once he saw that he could use this bone to break things, why not? Okay, I broke something, cool. But he went as far as to now smash the skull in of this skeleton, right? To show now there's a conquering, climbing from one point to another, right? So now what happens next? This is so many, and there's so much stuff in this next scene. My goal actually when I did this breakdown was I wanted to actually do a screen share. While I was talking, so that way you could see the imagery. I'll probably do that for the next one because it was so much, right? So now he goes back to his waterhole. He brings his crew, like the his tribe with him, quote unquote. And they're not really a tribe yet, they're just a group. He brings his group back to the waterhole that was previously taken from him by the more aggressive group. And he has his bone, right? But now, what was significant here? When he's coming up on the side of the hill, to like where the water hole is, he has the bone hidden behind his back as he's walking. So in that moment, he's learning stealth, right? So what you'll see is that outside of the brutality and desire for vengeance, you're seeing like there's a there's a he has stealth now. He has strategy now. You see, so he's coming up and he has it behind his back, and he then comes up to the one who was aggressive with him before, starts acting like he was going to yell and get loud on him. Moonwatcher takes the bone out, hits him on the head, cracks him. Wow, right? He cracks him on the head. He falls out. And of course, all of the other ones who were with him are like, what the heck is this? Right? It's very similar to when the obelisk first appeared, right? Why would they be so terrified of the obelisk? You have to imagine if you walking down the street and you see something that looks like it's defying space and time, right? You would be just as frightened. Like, what the heck is that? Well, you're talking about ape men who were living on the African plains, which weren't really African plains, but were living on the African plains, and everything that they see is birthed from nature. So now you have this object that appears out of nowhere that's humming. It's got a sound coming from it, but it also is clearly symmetrical. Whereas nothing in their environment is symmetrical. Nothing. So this thing has straight lines. It's boom and it's this. So it's clearly made by the machinery or the thought product of a higher intelligence. So it's completely frightening. Like, what the heck is this, right? We look at the obelisk like, oh, it's just a big giant iPhone, right? Because we're used to seeing those sort of shapes. In fact, now those sort of shapes dominate our landscape, and the natural ones have now been minimized. So now, when he takes that bone, he hits him, and everyone's like, "Oh, what the heck is this?" They don't know that there has not been an introduction as of yet of man killing man or ape man killing ape man or violence that's enacted between one another. So they're in shock. So he hits him in the head, right? Which again, hitting in the head, he's showing I'm taking out your authority. And then what happens is that every member in his tribe, after the ape man is already out, he's unconscious, he's dead, whatever, they all come up and take turns hitting him, right? What are they doing in that moment? They're letting the other tribe know that all of us have the capacity to kill. All of us have the capacity to help ourselves. We find that out also after he first used the bone. I actually skipped the scene. Remember when he first figured out how to use the bone to crush things, you see them later eating meat, right? So again, that introduction of eating meat is a sign of we're ending our innocence now. Innocence is over. We now will kill to eat. We're not scrounging on the ground for plants anymore. Now, if you read the book, you'll actually know that meat, it wasn't a taup, it was a leopard. Okay, the leopard, they were in a he's back again. Stop jerking, cheaping. Well, I wasn't doing none of that. I was just talking. I wasn't jerking. So they were actually in a cave, and well, he was in a cave. In fact, I think he was by himself in the book, and the leopard came to attack him, tried to get a meal, and he had the bone with him, and he attacked the leopard. That's how he figured out. Wait a minute, I can go get my water back. He actually killed the leopard. So in the movie, you see that scene where they're eating the meat. They're all eating meat now. Before they went and got their water back, that was actually the leopard that they had killed. Okay, so they go back, and every tribe member takes a turn, and yeah, it was the same leopard that was preying on them, right? They became hunters, they became tribalistic at that point. See, the moment where they are now all um hitting, they're all beating, this leader that they took out of the other tribe, then they have now become a tribe. Like I said before, that they were a group, but now that they're tribalistic hunters because they came up to get their water hole back like warriors. They're all hiding their sticks behind their back, so they're all using stealth. And also keep in mind that in that moment they became carnivores. So these were now carnivores fighting a vegetarian. Now, what's so significant about them becoming carnivores? Well, there's a couple of theories with that. There are certain proteins that are released in the brain that it's said, as part of an evolutionary process that made the brain a bit more evolved, that came from eating meat. So the eating of meat actually evolved the theory. All right. So just to be clear before you, because I eat plants, but we're talking about the artwork and what Kubrick may have been conveying to us, right? So they're now being taught by the obelisks, they're eating meat, so they're evolving at a different level than these other groups, right? But here's the key too. Here's the key. Um, they clearly went through a leap in cognition. Like it was a huge leap. Now, how did that leap in cognition occur? Murder. It was murder that took them. See, what this is kind of showing is that man evolves through man's capacity for violence. And man is defined by man's capacity, because before that, they were just 8 men picking fleas and ticks and bed bugs off of each other and eating them, right? Now they kill something. Now that we know how to hunt, we can get our water back. We know how to use war strategies. We can use tools now. We got all these different things that we can utilize, and it all came at the hands of murder, or came at the hands of death. So what you're seeing in this movie, like I said, is these constant cycles of death, and death brings on the evolution. You see, so through their evolving, or through their now, whether he smashed in the head of the dead animal, recognizing I have now won over death. I have triumphed over death. I have this tool now that allows me to triumph over death. He has that situation. And then now I killed a leopard, and then now I killed this leader who took my water previously. So what this has allowed me to do, okay, now I'll just skip ahead. You see that after he finishes beating the leader, he does this thing twice. When he's beating the dead top, right? Boom, boom, he's hitting it, he's hitting it. Like he throws the bone up, right? That throwing the bone up is significant. We see that more than once. Now, when they finish beating the leader, even one of the 8 men, he broke his bone over his head. You see it crack, wow, right? What they're showing you there, these are just tools. So after they finish beating him, he throws the bone up in the air. You see it's flipping in the air, right? So what is that saying? That's saying that we are the users of these tools. In our very next scene, we see that bone is going clockwise, and then it flashes, kind of flashes, it fades into a ship that's flying in outer space that's now spinning counterclockwise. Okay. Now, what that's saying is that because of our capacity to kill, our willingness to kill and to be savage on the planetary level with other humans, it has now granted us access to the heavens. Okay. So you want to look at that, and I know that may sound crazy, because it's like, well, why would God let killers in? The monolith taught them how to kill. And and because they now learned how to kill, they kept themselves from going extinct. They would have died out, you see, but we kill. We kill now, and we learn to use these tools, but we're using these tools. So after I'm done beating this dude's head in, I throw the bone away. But then in our next scene, we see man is now completely dependent upon the tools to the point that the man is now living inside of the tool. When we go into the space station, we'll save that for part two. We're not going to get into that right now. But now I just wanted to share some of the info on just the simian ancestry that's kind of being pointed out in this particular film, and how things had kind of changed when they killed the rival tribe leader or group leader just for this little space of water, which was the other significant thing. See, this is a mirroring of the Cold War. You see, the truth is it was a little patch of water, but it was enough for all of them. Because what happens, you see, you get this in the book, after they killed that leader, their group joined with Moonwatcher's group. So now they became one big tribe after that. You see, so there was clearly enough there was enough water for everyone, but there had to be somebody who was going to dominate the source. This goes back to Cold War between Russia and the US, which again I'll break down later, because Kubrick, he includes that right into his treatment, like shortly after the scene where there's some talks about Russia and whatnot. But what we're clearly seeing is that technology and tools have historically been used by man to terrorize one another. Not because he could have took the bone and say, "Hey, maybe I can farm with this. Maybe I can build a cage or a fence with all these bones and to keep the leopards away." You know, and he said, "No, I'm gonna kill." I'm gonna use this to kill. And after I kill, everybody in the tribe is gonna keep beating this guy's brains in to instill terror in those who once tried to oppress us through their taunts and whatnot. You see, so there's a significant thing there. And part of this is also just the theories that were prevalent in the 1960s. You know, you had the Homo habilis, and Homo habilis means handy man. Habilis is handy, homo is man, right? So what it essentially meant was that man was kind of signified, or man was described by man's use of tools. So the era where man was now able to use certain tools and to evolve those tools was mirrored man's actual evolution, which is silly. I mean, if you really think about it, because what about consciousness? You know, what about morality? What about civility? You know, but again, this is somebody's, you know, other sort of interpretation. You know, even the theory that brains became larger when man stopped eating berries, and they know how to spell it though. You know, when man stopped eating berries and roots and leaves and began to eat meat protein, that the brain enlarged and evolved and developed at a different level. You know, so again, all different sort of theories. Um, but again, you see the competing with extinction. You're competing with different tribes and starvation and predators and things like that. Um, they were more sociable as vegetarians. Now, what you see though after that scene is, if you look at the landscape, it's actually more lush. If you look around, there's actually a bit more greenery, there's more shrubs. That was obviously done on purpose to show like the whole earth has evolved now. Like everything has kicked it up a notch. They're still side by side with the top, meaning that they're not like trying to kill them all out. They're not trying to, you know, like how they did with the buffalo. They're not trying to do that. They just eat enough for what they need. You see, so these animals can still feel safe around them, knowing that they're not trying to drive them to extinction through greed at this stage in man's development. Okay, where the obelisk has them right now. All right, so I'm gonna break pause there, and part two we're gonna pick up the next spot. Right. So for those of you who haven't watched the flick, then none of this made any sense to you. But but for those of you who have, willfully, it kind of opened up some. I'll check into the chat real quick. Willfully, it opened up some of the understanding of maybe what was happening, and even some of the correlations that they were making with that they were making with the Garden of Eden as well, and how even just touching the obelisk, they were able to awaken a dormant intelligence or evolve an intelligence that they wanted to be more present. Um, yeah, it was strange, just barren land, but I found it odd that the sound of the wildlife did not match the visuals of the land. That's Sovereign Eats, right? It was again, there's an artistic element, so scientifically, and just know that even when we get to the outer space scenes, if you will, it's not the things that you're seeing are not scientifically possible. It's just they're not accurate, right? But some of the inaccuracies are actually something deeper that's happening too, which we'll get into. Again, there's a certain artistic license that Kubrick took, with lines and symmetry in the art, that even though they're not scientifically correct, they create an even deeper sort of statement. You know, um, I thought the first thing when he first saw war, it reminded me of that. That's it. That's war. That's low. Okay. Um, Zach said even after they were eating meat, wasn't those things still hanging around? Yeah, because they were in no fear. They were still in harmony. Perhaps they were there to be eaten, but man had not evolved at that point to even understand that maybe that's what should happen. Zach says, could we look at the cave as a time when people were together? Then later it was more of individuals. They were together around the water hole. If you notice, when they went into the cave, they were more irritable. They were sitting next to each other, and one went to go put like a piece of something in his mouth to eat, and the other one like snatched it out of his hand. So once they got into that cave, they were now more cognizant of their lack of resources. That's actually what happened. I would say, but I mean, interpret it how you want. You know, some were placed in the garden while others were left less evolved. The chosen ones reversed the ones subject to the chosen even. Well, chosen ones, right? The thing is, some were placed in the garden after they were made. The Most High placed man in the garden, right? So there's certain groups. Now, what was the group that was placed in the garden? Adoma, the ones from the red earth. There might have been other ones made of other things. One's made from iron, one's made from fire, one's made from water. There's definitely a whole nother kingdom in the water. That's a whole nother science that, unfortunately, when you start talking about it, it's almost like flat earth theory. It's like, nah, it can't be people living at the center of the earth. There's people living at the center of the earth. It's even in the Bible. I mean, for people who, hold the Bible as the end all be all, it's in the Bible. Maybe we'll get into that one day. But even the water, the mist that came up from the earth, where did it come from? There was no rain up until before the flood. Where did the water come from? It came from the center of the earth. you know Again, I've often said it before, why can't we go to the North Pole? Why can't we see? Why are satellite images not allowed over the North Pole? I can understand you don't want us to go there, but we can't even look at it unless there's an entrance there. As many holy books have said over the years, there's an entrance there to the center of the earth, where there are whole other different societies, where the Rephaim live and the Nephilim live, right? So, yeah. Okay, Sovereignty says the irritability in the cave made me consider the cave as a cage and a reminder of the limitation. The cage was almost, I mean, the womb, excuse me, was like devolving. Like we got to go back into the womb. You see, we go back into chaos, back into the void, back into the darkness. Because remember, at that point, the sun had set in the west. So it was like we have done all we can in this age. It was a new day. The age was the rising of the sun in the east, set in the west. This is it. So this age is we're hungry all the time. We're getting hunted. We can't even get our water. What happens next? And then the obelisk appears. Okay, now I'm going to show you the next stage. You see? And what you'll find throughout the film is that just like when they find the obelisk on the moon, now we've conquered the skies. We're in outer space. We're ready for the next obelisk. You see? And then after that, he goes to Jupiter. But we'll get into all that. Okay. Um, is that what was being depicted in the scene with the bones? I'm not sure. That was probably much further back. Um, yeah, it's probably much further back. Um, so I'm not sure what I said during that point. Um, all right, cool. I think I got everything. We about an hour in, which is what I wanted. Well, maybe a little less. All right, so we're gonna do part two soon. We're gonna go deeper. Willfully, I probably will do, if I can, if I remember, some type of screen sharing, so I can actually show the images. Because, like I said, the dialogue, there's not a lot of dialogue in this film, you know, but it's saying so much. Even what I just shared about the ape men, there's so much more that I, didn't even touch upon. Like the alignment that you see in the beginning of the sun, moon, and stars, father, son, and mother, right? So constantly you'll see when there's a vision of the obelisk, when they look over the obelisk, when they look up to it, one of the things you see is that there's an alignment of sun, moon, and stars. But even though you see an alignment of sun, moon, and stars when they look up at the obelisk, if you look to the side, there's another light. So what's that other light? You see? So there's so much in this particular film. Okay, Menelek says referring to the monolith teaching Moonwatcher how to use his digits. Yeah, exactly. He was showing him using the bone, but he was showing him how to throw, right. He was showing him how to aim as well. When you get from the book, like he was throwing bones at different objects and stuff like that. Basically just involving his intelligence, which you see when he goes to attack. Not only did he attack him, but he's like, nah, everybody hit him in the head. So he had some kind of theory to the point. And then when he threw the bone away, he was like, all right, I don't need technology now. Everything is peaceful where it should be. So let me put this away. Which again becomes a stark difference, which you see later on in the film, where now technology is terrorizing man, if you will, or what we're living today, right? All right. So cool, says Ollie. I'm gonna watch it again. Yeah. It's one of them films you could just keep watching and watching and watching. There's so much in it, you know. After the quote about the stars and man being equated to each other, it made me wonder about the term star child. Yeah, star child we're gonna get into. I purposely didn't mention the star child. But I could tell you right now, the star child is here the entire time. From this point that we're the eight men to the end of the movie, the star child is there the whole time. What is that other light that you see in the distance? All right, so I guess I could give away the spoiler. Okay, but yeah, the star child is a very important character. You're gonna find out why. But again, everything revolves around death. I urge you to watch it again. Watch it every time we meet and discuss it. You're gonna get something more and something more and something more and something more. That's really what it's about. Like when you hear me speak about Ifa, and Ifa being the digging or the scratching of the surface, you got to go beneath the surface. And sometimes it's very tempting just to just be lazy about stuff. All right, I watched it and I don't know, I ain't get it. But you don't really evolve in that way. And a lot of times, it is very helpful to kind of kill off the notions that you might have had before. I'm not an evolutionist. That's not a theory that I hold to. But do I imagine that ape men once existed? Yeah, I do. I just didn't come from them. That's not what my origins are. But I do think that those type of creatures did exist. In fact, I think some of them still exist on the planet. Could it be said that technology should help to restore balance and then be put aside? I think that's what the eight men were saying. I think that's what the eight men were saying. But I would say hold that theory. I would say hold that theory. Could there be a connection between the monolith and the Ark of the Covenant? Good question. Yeah, good question. Um, yeah, there could be the presence of the Most High, right? You know, um, yeah. I'm not gonna say too much. Um, because we get into more monolith stuff as we go. So I don't the reason I'm just don't want to say too much because I don't want to take away too much of what you may have, you know. There's so much when you're exploring a film like this, and it's built upon so many different theorems, Um Yeah, Ark of the Covenant. One day I'll have to do the full breakdown on that one. Maybe we'll even do a breakdown on Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. If I do Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm gonna also have to do Jewel of the Nile with Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas, because that was pretty much the same. It was about the Ark of the Covenant too, but they were real slick about it. The Jewel of the Nile, it's deep. Um, every time I saw it, this the image, it sound, and even the sound reminded me of. Yeah, you clearly saw that it was an electronic kind of device. Y'all peeping out my stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to. I don't want to give away too much. You know what I mean? I like people to have their experience. And I feel like I'll save some of that until later things, like, because I know, like, some of you may not have even watched it, but now hopefully you'll have an interest in watching it, and we can really get into it together, because this is the type of flick that you could build a belief system off of if you know how to break down different little parts. But it teaches you a lot about governmental systems, you know, the fighting over resources. What is a Cold War? A Cold War is what the ape men did in the beginning. Woo, grunting and waving hands, but there's no fighting. There's a whole bunch of smoke and no fire. That's a Cold War. Over what? Some small, scanty little resource that you really could share if you wanted to. You really could share it. But you create all this tension and confusion where it need not be. That's a Cold War. So there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot that we could cover. All right, so I'm gonna head out. Right. Thank you all for tuning in, and I definitely will that you watch some more. Um, these type of breakdowns and this type of thinking is what we explore in our new. You know, just going beneath the surface and figuring out how it's relevant. There's nothing more saddening to me when I see, like, a lot of different groups break down stuff just to have a bunch of more irrelevant information. Esoterics can be fun, but esoterics is just the reward icing on the cake of really exploring practical, hands-on, pragmatic subjects so that we can actually evolve as a people. So when you think about the Black creative force, or in Kemet, you might have called it the Jed, or you might have called it the Tekken or the Tekkenu, right? But or in this film we called it the Black Obelisk, or some might have called it the Washington Monument, right? Or some might call it the Python, or the Wood, or the Viper, or the One-Eyed Snake, or the Johnson, right? There's a lot of different words for the sausage. But nonetheless, the creative force, and more importantly, the generative force, what generates causes, so being able to command your own day and to create um the greatest and most frictionless path to your destiny is really what it's about, you know because it's been written already for you in the book of life. Now you can grab hold of it, or you can create more friction and turmoil, um and then you never get it. So there was a reason that that particular group was chosen in the movie. When we talk about Anu, we talking about the tireless ember that burns in certain people who that have been burning from eternity. Those are the people who were chosen to receive the generative force. And yeah, it could be scary at first. It's like when they saw the obelisk and like, oh my goodness, what is this? This is something completely different. Sometimes it's like that even in Anu. You've seen women who are content, who are feminine, who are women. You see men who are actually men, you know, um, who have beards, and, who are striving for ownership of everything, not just their businesses. They're striving for ownership of their family. I want to own my wife. I want to own my children. I want to own everything, right? Because I'm going to be a proper steward over what I own, So for some, that's such a scary concept because it feels so foreign, when you are tied into and being beat up, by the devil's society. And that's what you saw in this film. These When they were out there in the open, anybody, the leopard was jumping on them, the other tribes were jumping on them. They had no food, clothing, shelter. They had no culture that they were able to shelter under. You see, and once they were able to come under some real otherworldly teachings, otherworldly, like, what the heck is this? Well, someone's got to be bold enough to approach it. Someone's got to be bold enough to touch it, right? And that boldness is going to transform and change you. How did it transform and change me? Shoot, I was eating plants yesterday and roots. Today I'm eating raw meat. I wasn't expecting that. But if this is what it takes for me to mirror what happens in the heavens, because that's what was happening. So if death was happening on the planet, then death was happening on the heavens, which now gives me access to the heavens. And for some people, they're not ready to really understand what the people of heaven are about, because they're still looking for babies in diapers with quivers and arrows, and they're thinking that's what righteousness is, that's what holiness is. But there's wars in heaven just like there's wars on earth. And now is a time that you prepare for them, because there's so many things that you're being desensitized towards. Always remember, in order for them to take away your Second Amendment, they got to first take away your First Amendment. Where'd that come from, right? Because it's right in the movie. Private censorship. It's happening already. Privatizing it. Censorship. After they get that lockdown, why do you think it's all? We had another shooting, right? This guy went into hospital, shot his doctor. 45-year-old guy shot his doctor and three other people. Yo, that MK Ultra is a mug. MK Ultra is a mug, boy. You thought just the Manchurian candidates were only all the presidents we've had. MK Ultra is a mug. Some of these people are volunteering for these programs. And then this is the stuff that happens. All right, everyone. So enjoy your evening, and we'll definitely be back for the next decode. I will that you all here share it, invite your family and friends, because it gets deeper when we get into the next section, and we're going to deal more with the symmetry and that concept and the colors and what those different things represent. All right. So this is Chief Yuya. This has been movie decodings with Low, and I'm sitting in Chief Yuya sitting in, and we'll do a part 2 of 2001: A Space Odyssey when we come back next Thursday. All right. Until then, everyone be safe and everybody be well. I see somebody said something about a zebra. The leopard had a monopoly till he got caught slipping, ate the last zebra and everything. You know what? That was actually a dead horse that they painted. Yeah. So I watched the making of 2001 years ago. So it actually was a dead horse that they painted. But anyway, everyone be well and enjoy your evening. Peace, 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 peace. All right.